As I just mentioned before, in our countries, in these small island development states, in most cases, they have very low institutional and technical capacity. And therefore, I think solutions need to be rather practical, rather useful and appropriate for the available limited resources for the solutions to generate the desired kind of positive impact and to sustain in the long term. And there's no point in bringing external, very high kind of advanced cutting edge solutions that no one on the islands know how to use. And when we leave the solution, it will be lost in someone's computer or drawer. And Jung has some examples of that. He can share some examples of that, unfortunately. Therefore, in phase 2, the Programmatic ASA piloted the approach in 4 small island states and developed knowledge projects to build local technical capacity. There was a very concerted kind of conscious effort to work closely with clients, with development partners, and to use the information and experience to inform our operations. As an example of this, the ASA and Jung can give the details, informed the design of an IPF, an investment lending in Vanuatu. And that engagement, that project received 100% climate co-benefit. This is an example of the type of results that we are aiming for, to maximize the climate co-benefits that we can deliver through our operations and to support our client countries in a sustained manner in the long term. But it's critical for the bank to work with client countries and development partners to enhance climate resilience of our operations and of the communities and the economies that we serve. Only then we will be fulfilling our mission in a rather sustainable and inclusive way. Just want to say I wish you all a very good discussion. Thank you to the organizers. First, the team will provide a brief overview of the findings and experience of this Programmatic ASA, and then we'll expand to discuss the relevance of the work and for other small island development states and for the countries in the 3 regions. I'm also rather interested in exploring how we can continue this very good, fruitful collaboration between Transport GP and the Urban GP. How we can continue working with GFDRR and with our development partners in order to leverage our efforts and to invest in our countries in small island states. This workshop or seminar is a good opportunity to hear not only from the presenters but from all of you and to share your experience in the small island states and in the fragile states. So thank you very much, and back to you, Jung, who wants to take it over from here. Wish you all a full session and a good evening and good morning to all of you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben, for your opening remarks that sets the stage. And resilient transport in small island developing states. Actually, we started 5 or 6 years ago, and it's a long journey for the whole team to go through this Programmatic ASA, and also, of course, it's more than 2 years, challenging from the COVID impacts, and it's. But of course, from those challenges, we learn a lot, in working together and also working with our clients to identify what's the needs from the countries and what we can bring from our support from the World Bank, both from Transport GP and also from DIM. So we work very, very closely together and then try our best, to bring the benefits to the countries, and then we do also continue to work with our country, and as you said, Ben, just to bring the benefits to the countries, and then continue to see how and what we can continue to have the countries. And after Ben, by opening remarks, the team would go through the what we have been doing over the last 6 years, and with some presentation from the team members and some reason from our ASA and some lesson learned, and then we have discussion that will be led by Karen and Kunwaida, just to see, what the result, what would be the lesson learned, and then what we can do or continue to provide support to our client countries, in SIDS. And of course, we have some other, discussion over the, what we did in terms of the online training course and, the resilient transport in small island developing state webpage. And, let me, on behalf of the team, let me go through some of the, staff over the journey that we have gone through over the last 6 years. And, we just completed this, in the last April, 6 years. Next slide, please, Dan. Yes, and as Ben just mentioned, I mean, the objective of the ASA is actually to, bring what would be the needs and rise, the critical needs from the SIDS, in terms of bringing or integrating the climate resilient in transport into their own, transport asset management system. And, what would be the ability of the country, to manage that, to absorb the support from the bank, and then to manage themselves, their own system from daily work, and then to continue to bring in the resilience in their system. And, from the bank side, we both from the transport and DIM, we work together and try to match or to link from the DIM information, the data, and also from transport sector, the system, so that we bring together and then to connect to each other, and then to make our clients to understand this is a need to bring the resilience into their transport asset management system. And also, of course, from our activity, we would like to, promote our, understanding among ourselves, from the bank colleagues as well, just to try to also learn from our other colleagues, and so we can bring in or maximize the resilience in our country, client countries. And of course, it's not a kind of, we have to also take into consideration of the collaboration and cooperation from other international development partner as well, because, many in our client countries, we see many international community development partners are very active in bringing or helping our clients to bring the resilience in the country as well. Dan, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there are 3 phases under the Programmatic ASA. Phase 1 was completed in 2017, and a report called, a call for action, has been was presented at the COP23 to bring in a kind of need. What would be the need, to bring in the resilient in transport asset management system in the SIDS? And Maria will go through the phase 1 in more detail later. Phase 2, follow phase 1, from when we've implemented from 2019 to 2022, and actually to connect or to continue what we, from a call for action, and then what would be the action in the country. So we selected 4 countries under phase 2 to implement the activities under the in the SIDS, and then to bring in the, and then we are going to present the recent as well in these 4 countries. And the phase 3, of course, we need to also bring in a kind of capacity building and knowledge sharing for our client. So we'll go through that later on. And there are a number of report in each country we have worked on. In 4 countries we work on, and also we to summarize what we have done in those 4 countries, we have a main report just to summarize what would be the reason and also lesson learned from those 4 countries what we have worked on. So let me now hand over the floor to Maria just to go through the phase 1, what we have done, and what would be the reason from phase 1, and then what we can bring in the reason from phase 1 into phase 2 and phase 3. Over to you, Maria. Next slide.
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you so much, Zhang. Well, very good morning and good evening, everyone. So as Zhang mentioned, I'll present briefly a few of the key messages from the report, A Call for Action. And I will also provide a brief overview of the framework and approach that were proposed in that report for enhancing climate resilience in the transport sector in SIDS. So as was mentioned by Ben, and I believe by Zhang a little bit as well, SIDS are located in East Asia Pacific region, but also in the Caribbean region and African region. SIDS, as you may know, SIDS are geographically, many of them are geographically isolated, small economies with small population numbers. Many are volcanic in nature, and some are mountainous, while others are low-lying islands. So SIDS are exposed to climate change impacts and natural hazards, like, for example, flooding, landslides, cyclones, and hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, and as well as sea level rise. So, well, a first key message that came out of the report was that SIDS are or suffer high economic losses from natural disasters, and that is illustrated there on the graph on the left. So you can see, the blue bars show that SIDS have some of the highest average annual losses from disasters. So you can see that clearly. So these are average annual losses as a percentage of GDP. So for example, Grenada on the far left has 9% average annual loss. And Vanuatu, which is the country just after Grenada, is 7% average annual loss. So these percentages are very significant for these economies, and I wanted to mention that when a disaster like a cyclone or a hurricane strike or makes landfall in the country, very often it impacts the whole economy. So Jiang, would you mind passing to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the second message, second key message from the report is that natural disasters, when they strike, the transport sector is highly, suffers high costs and damages. So as you can see on that table, for example, the flood in 2014 in Solomon Islands resulted in 90% of the total infrastructure damage costs were attributed to the transport sector. Jiang, would you mind going? Thank you. So a third key message is that, resilient transport measures can play an important role in reducing disaster vulnerability and losses. So as shown in that graph, the resilient transport measures, like, for example, improving road maintenance and construction design standards, they can reduce asset losses from natural disasters by up to 24%, as you can see in Tonga. That was the results for Tonga. And as well as reduce well-being losses by 25%. So this is very significant. So the good news is that although SIDS are highly exposed to natural disasters and climate change impacts, and that these impacts result in significant damage and costs for the transport sector, it is possible to reduce disaster vulnerability and those losses by deploying targeted measures to improve the resilience and focus on transport asset management. So as was mentioned, the report also proposed like a framework. Well, but before I mention this framework, I wanted to mention that this report also compiles many best practices that were already being deployed across the 4 regions, and there was a sense that there could be a lot of cross-regional knowledge exchange, and there was a need to systematize this approach and facilitate the way we engage with the client countries. So this is one of the reasons why we proposed like this framework, which consists in 5 pillars. As you can see on the bottom of the slide, it includes systems planning, engineering design, operations and maintenance, contingency programming, and institutional capacity and coordination. So Jiang, would you mind passing the slide, please? I'll aim to be brief. Many of you are probably already familiar with this framework. So systems planning consists in strengthening the resilience of the transport at the network level. So by reducing the exposure of critical infrastructure to climate risks, Engineering design looks at consistent setting climate and natural hazard informed design standards and construction and material specifications. Operations and maintenance, as the name indicates, I mean, it consists in integrating climate resilience considerations in transport systems operations and maintenance provisions, so that we extend the asset lifespan and also, ensure continued good performance or expected performance and service levels of the asset and of the network. Contingency programming. Oh, sorry, Jiang, contingency programming is also a very important element, and in some countries it's well advanced in the transport sector, in others less, and it's basically consists in preparing the transport institutions to be able to respond to natural hazards and extreme weather events. And finally, the institutional capacity and coordination, which is it's a pillar that that supports the other 4 pillars. It consists in establishing the required capacity in terms of the processes, the people, the technical capacity, the technology and the tools, as well as the finance to deliver the resilient transport assets and services. And it also involves looking at establishing the multi-agency and across-departmental collaborations to enable sharing of data, information and knowledge in support of the resilient transport. Okay, Jiang, you can move to the next slide. Okay, finally, my last slide is the report also proposed a 5-step approach for country engagement. And this was very much noting that it is important to have buy-in from the client countries, as well as tailor the solutions to their contexts, local contexts. So this 5-step approach starts with a diagnosis of the current transport sector and infrastructure management systems. It then works with the client to develop like a desired system design. Then it develops a transition plan that enables the country to go from current situation to the desired system. It aligns the transition plan with the finance available, being it World Bank or partners. And then, of course, implementation. So hopefully, or very well aligned with some of our instruments, finance instruments. Okay, so I'll stop for now, and I'll pass my word to Zhang. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Yeah, Zhang, please. Yeah, and so what we can do, based on the proposed life cycle framework and the 5-step approach, to implement the climate resilient transport in those our client countries, what we can turn from those proposed solution into the country, to making sure that to make sure that we can have our client countries to build their system toward the resilience against the climate change and the natural disaster. So we selected under phase 2, we selected 4 countries: Vanuatu and Solomon Island in Pacific, St. Vincent in Africa, and Cape Verde in Latin America, to implement those proposed solution or activities implemented in those countries. And we follow strictly the 5-step approach and also the framework and implement, and then we can of course under the ASA, because of limitation of the funding, we cannot implement everything we propose under the or identify through the process, and we just select very critical activities to be implemented on ASA. But luckily, the bank always have a kind of IPF to go along with the ASA, so that there is a kind of very strong connection from ASA proposal or reason into the IPF, so that we have other opportunity to provide our support to the client countries to implement those recommended activities identified under the ASA. And of course, in those 4 countries, we have a number of activities implemented, and we would like to present, in this seminar on those, some of the reason we have implemented under those 4 countries. Next slide, please, Dan. Yeah, so let me go through a kind of each step by step under the proposed 5-step approach. So first thing, I think this is a very practical, approach. We could, work with our client country in order to, develop or enhance their current system toward the resiliency. So the first step would always, try to understand their current system. So, we have been working with our client countries, on the staff in both the transport sector and also the Ministry of Climate Change also. Staff, just try to understand their current system in the countries. What would be, the system they do have, what they need. It's a kind of, just to understand better their current system. So we run through the diagnostics, process in the 3 countries actually, because among the 4 countries, Solomon Island, Vanuatu, and Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, the clients express their focus on the road sector. So we run through the diagnostic process, in the road sector, and then you can see, of course, from the diagnostic process, we just kind of propose some kind of question or so these are what would be the current system, what through the life cycle framework that Maria just mentioned. So we run through the system planning, engineering design, material and operation maintenance, contingency, and of course, we also run through a kind of what would be the current institutional capacity and coordination among the ministries in the country. And on the file in the table on the right side, you can see that a lot of N means there's no or non-existence of the sum of the activities, or I mean in the system that need to be implemented, that need to be improved or enhanced in the future, so that to make sure that the client would have the climate resilient transport asset management system. So from this we can understand better the current system in our client countries. Next slide, please. Zach. And then we work with with our client countries just to see what their wish, what their plan in terms of having a new system or enhanced system, taking into consideration of the climate resilience. And we bring in a kind of to make it simply understand, or to make it simpler for the client countries, we bring in a kind of principle we call soft here. It's we have a software, we have hardware, but we try to simplify what we can bring in our support in the country. So we bring in a kind of soft principles here. Soft means S means simple, because we know that in our country, in SIDS countries, they do have a very kind of simple system. We do have a kind of limited number of people, and also they do have a very limited capacity to manage the system as well. So the as simple, the better the system we can bring in, so that the client countries can actually use it and implement it. And of course, from the simple design of the system, we can make sure that the client can make it operational in their daily work as well. So it's actually to support their business functions associated with the transport planning, budgeting from the also from Ministry of Finance, and also operations afterward. And if F means flexible. I mean of course we know that in our SIDS they are composed of many islands. So we pick just very key islands where we have larger relatively in the country, the network, and then we build the system there based on the module module principle. So we build the first one based on the first, say for example in Vanuatu, we build in Santo Island, for example, so how to make sure that the module would run smoothly or run well. And then once it tests running very smoothly or well, we can scale it up to other modules as well, to other islands as well. It's a kind of ISS, International Space station in the world we have, and then it's just a kind of we have, once we have a new module, we can plug it in so that the whole system will run through together. And T means the transferable, because there is a kind of disconnection between the transport sector and the Ministry of Climate Change or Ministry of Finance, for example, in terms of financing and budgeting. So how we can bring in this connection from the transport sector, information, data, their planning, and then bring in to connect with the climate disaster, information data into transport, and also, from the planning process from transport sector, how they can connect with the Ministry of Finance so that they can, have a better link between the planning and also budgeting and financing in the future, so that to make sure that the needs from the transport sector would be implemented based on the funding allocation from the Ministry of Finance. So the soft means, simple, operational, flexibility, and transferable. Next slide, please, Zan. And the third step would, based on those, diagnostics and also the design system design, and then we can, bring in a kind of transition plan. Actually, it's a kind of what will be the recommendation for the next step to implement or activities to be implemented, enhancing or developing from the current system to be, a resilient system. So, in many countries, they might have, already the system in there. So we do not, eliminate that current system, but instead, we build based on the current system, based on the existing capacity system and scheme. And of course, in the transition plan, we look, as Maria just mentioned, we look into the funding process. I mean, the processes, the people, technology, and of course, funding as well. And then we, in the three countries, Vanuatu, Solomon Island, and St. Vincent, we, produce a kind of very detailed transition plan, that set out a kind of, which is the area to be improved. This is activities you need to improve, and of course, this is, what should be the time frame for the client to implement it. And also, of course, we based on that try to find the next step in terms of the finding or helping the client to find the funding for them to implement those recommended activities as well. Next slide, please, Zhang. And yeah, so I mean, so from the implementation of those recommended activities, as I mentioned, we have some critical activities implemented under the funding of the ASA, but also we do have the implementation, the funding from the IPF, so that we can implement more activities in those countries. And, in the 4 countries, the recent from phase 2, we have a number of reports, that, tell, in very details of the activities and recently implemented in those 4 countries. And you see a lot of, reports, produced for those 4 countries. And of course, under the phase 2 as a summary, just, a guiding, summary for all those 4 country reports. We have, on the far left, you can see the report for the main, like the main report for the phase 2 as well. That summarize the reason implemented in those 4 countries, and also lesson learned in those 4 countries from the implementation as well. Next slide, please, Zhang. Zhang. Next slide, please, Zhang. Yeah. So let team now go a bit. We just would like to present to you the detail a bit in terms of implementation of activities in 4 countries. And in Solomon Island, we run through planning. Very comprehensively implemented in Solomon Island. And I would not go through the some slides in this presentation, a PowerPoint, but I would like to hand over the floor to Bowen, who is leading the program or activities in Solomon Island, to run through the summaries of the recently implemented in the country. Floor is yours, Bowen. Thanks.
So, Giang, could you please change to my slide deck, please? Good evening, good morning, colleagues. Thank you again for joining us today. Greetings from Singapore. And next, I will share some of the highlights of our works in Solomon Islands. Now, I will not attempt to summarize a 3-year-long program in 10 minutes, but focus on the approach we used and lessons we learned. Hopefully, you would find this relevant to your work and countries you're supporting. Giang, can we have the slides up, please? Thank you. We can go to the next slides. Thanks. Right. So overall, the steps we take in Solomon Islands was already described in detail by zone. So I will not go into that. Next, I will kind of share more details on what we implemented and how those critical elements look like in Solomon Islands. Next slides, please. The first key element we implemented was proposing an overarching framework that lays out a resilient road asset management system in TELS for the Ministry of Infrastructure Development, MID, in Solomon Island. We can call this framework, RAMF. On top of the key building block includes what you see here. It's policy, data technology, processes, human resources, competence, and finance. And of course, on top of that, the framework indicates how this road asset management mechanism could make climate and disaster resilience an integral part of it at its core. Let's deep dive into some of these phases. Next slide, please, Gail. First, policy and executive commitment. So what we found in Solomon Islands was that there is a generally very high awareness of the strategic importance of building climate resilience in the transport sector. So we didn't have to do much of convincing in terms of why such effort is needed. The most impactful support was actually expanding, the top senior officials. In this case, MID's permanent secretary, his knowledge on how climate resilience can be integrated throughout MID's existing business model. So we laid out steps that are essential to improve the baseline or ongoing resilience level of road infrastructure, how to build readiness to make sure your road assets are ready for disasters and climate shocks, and how to put into place a response mechanism that can promotely mobilize after disaster occurs, and lastly, how to plan a recovery programs that build back better. This full picture gave the MID's top senior officials a very concrete idea of what it takes to turn MID from a program delivery agency, which is often the case, for most of the transport authorities in countries like Solomon Island, into a asset manager that manages road infrastructure to be resilient and long-lasting. Next slide, please. Next, data, information, and the technological systems. From the diagnosis, we found that the lack of quality data on road assets and the information regarding climate and disasters is really the bottleneck for MID to implement the RAMF. Without good road asset data, you don't really know exactly what's there for you to manage. And without climate and disaster information services, of course, you can't adapt your road asset to be prepared for the coming shocks. At MID has the existing asset management unit, and they run what they call a Solomon Island transport asset management system. It's an existing computer-based system. But this system mostly is a basic asset inventory database. And the type of asset covered is only road. There's no other asset types such as bridges or structures included in this inventory. And more importantly, there is basically no functioning road condition data, which is the most critical data in terms of assessing the physical fragility of asset. To address this data gap, we did two things. One, we proposed a data strategy for MID. It defines the data items that matter most in the reporting and decision-making processes of MID, along with the frequency of data collection that could be sufficient for the intended user appropriate decision. Most importantly, it defines the lowest level of details required to make the application of each data item. So what this data strategy does is it helps MID to minimize the efforts and the scale required for data collection, while maximize the usefulness in terms of informing decisions. Second, we introduced a modernized tool for data collection and analysis, which completely transformed MID's data collection practices from year-long manual processes that are based on subjective observations and surveys into a simple, digitalized, and regular process. The tool we brought in is called RoadRate. You can see it on this figure. It is a cell phone-based application where you can mount your phone on the car when you do the road survey, and the application automatically captures road roughness data, IRIs, based on the car's vibration, and update that data into cloud when the phone is connected to the internet. It then allows you to download your data, conduct Excel-based analysis, and adjust your calibrations, etc. So in the past, just to put this into perspective, in the past, simply cleaning up road survey and importing all the survey result into computer would take the asset management unit a whole year. Now, all that steps are automatized with more accurate data. Regular asset condition inspection become possible for MID and Solomon Island for the very first time. Next slide, please. In addition to data, we also developed a detailed proposal to upgrade the existing CTAMS, the Solomon Island Transport Asset Management System. As I said before, CTAMS at the moment is a data inventory. It does not support any decision-making functions. The reporting function is also very, very limited. So for decision-making purposes, we focused on 3 key modules to optimize the processes. The first one, the prioritization of investment and maintenance programs. With this module, a set of predefined parameters with consulted weight allocation would be programmed to the system, and it will automatically generate a list of road interventions based on their level of priority. This, of course, make this kind of prioritization process much more transparent and reliable. Second, the integration of climate and disaster risk information into road planning and the prioritization process. This module would save MID's efforts in developing otherwise required in-house expertise for interpreting climate and disaster information. Now they can simply use that information easily through predefined algorithms. We will talk more about climate data and utilization later. Lastly, we built a function that links road condition data from road rate application with the asset management system in order to create a feedback loop that connects investment decisions with improved result on the ground, the improved road resilience and performance. Such function is most relevant for reporting purpose to MID's permanent secretary, and for him to justify things like budget, human resources demand, etc. at the central government. The upgrade of the CTAMS will be financed by the ongoing IPF project, and based on the proposals we come out from those functions. Next slide, please. After data and the technological tools, the next key building block of the REMF is lifecycle business processes, which arguably is the most important building blocks. Any transformation as we know it, eventually comes down to the little changes in daily tasks and the responsibilities. So we developed a de facto operational manual that details out what, how the MID's asset management unit and their maintenance and operations team should work together to perform asset management functions throughout data collection management, network investment analysis, network program development, all the way to the project level analysis, work packaging, and reporting. The most important principles that we proposed in this new business process include the following. Number one, building the critical data loop that connects investment decisions, inputs, works with results, improved road conditions and performance. Second, because MID has a relatively flat budget over the years, so we propose to increase the share of preventative maintenance and putting your scarce resources into the most critical and vulnerable assets. Third, making reporting flexible and tailor it based on the decision maker's information need. Next slide, please. So far, we've mainly talked about the building blocks for enabling a effective road asset management function at MID. Now let's talk a little bit in details on integrating climate and disaster risk information into asset management processes, which essentially comes down to climate risk information and its utilization. High-quality climatic and disaster risk assessment is the basis of resilient road asset management. Well, unfortunately, such information is not in place in Solomon Island, at least not in the form that can be utilized by MID. So we implemented activity under the TA to fill that gap. Road assets in Solomon Islands exposed to both climatic and seismic hazard risks. The differences between the two is that the seismic risks are unpredictable and the risk level remains more or less the same over time, while climatic risks are changing due to climate change. So under the TA, we addressed both, but for today's presentation, I would focus on climatic risks and how to tackle that. So to make road asset climate proof, the core challenge is to predict future climate under uncertainties and understand what that means really for road assets in terms of the risk level of extreme climate shocks. The state-of-the-art technology to project future climate is climate downscaling, which is what we did for Solomon Island. Let me briefly introduce the concept of climate downscaling. Climate scientists have developed numerous climate models for the future based on the projected greenhouse gases concentration emission scenarios under different future socioeconomic and technological assumptions. Those models are at a global scale. Climate downscaling is a process to downscale global climate models and projections to regional or local scale by using either dynamical or statistical downscaling methods. Due to the time limits, I will not go into the details of these two methods, but the bottom line is downscaled climate projection would provide sufficiently higher resolution projections to enable climate impact analysis and vulnerability studies for a specific locality. That is what MID would need for road infrastructure planning. Under the TA, we downscaled the regional climate model Australasian Cortex from 76 kilometer resolution to 5 kilometer resolution, covering the entire Solomon Island using the statistic downscaling method. We obtained the projected precipitations and temperature under two climate scenarios. One is a business zero climate scenario, RCP 8.5. Another one is a moderately mitigated climate scenario, RCP 4.5. So RCP 4.5 indicating a less warmed future. So, and we looked into how the future is going to look like for Solomon Island in the time frame of 2030, 2050, and 2085. The result of the downscaling for the country is shown at the table in the bottom. So basically taking timeline of 2085 as an example, under the business as usual scenario, Solomon Island's annual precipitation would reduce by 12.6% by 2085, and the annual mean temperature will increase by around 3 degrees Celsius. In comparison, under a moderately mitigated climate scenario, the precipitation will reduce by around 9.4%, and temperature will increase by 1.7 degrees Celsius. Next slide, please. So what does this mean? What does this precipitation and temperature projection tell us as road manager? We want to understand extreme climate shocks that would look like for those projections and how those would impose risks to our road assets. We therefore modeled the risk of extreme temperature and extreme precipitation for Solomon Island in the future, and it produced hazard maps that help us locate different exposure level across the country and where road assets are located. Extreme temperature is defined by the number of incidents in a year with more than 10 days exceeding 35 degrees Celsius. The impact of this extreme temperature to road is relatively direct. It basically jeopardizes road integrity and leads to things like pavement melting. The hazard map tells us coastal areas in Solomon Island is more exposed to extreme temperature risks. Extreme precipitation, however, the impact is less direct. Extreme precipitation is defined as the number of days in a year with more than 20 millimeter rainfall within 24 hours. What's worth highlighting for Solomon Island from the projection is that although the annual mean precipitation for the country is likely to reduce, as we see in the previous slides, but the risk of having extreme rainfall still remain, just for fewer days. That's good news, of course, but that means extreme situation remain a threat. The impact, for extreme rainfall, of course, when it comes to road, present itself as flooding. But the extent that flooding would damage the road assets depends on several factors, such as the topography, the existing and designed discharge capacity of hydraulic structures. Under the TA, we developed hydrologic and hydraulic models to evaluate flooding risks and impact to road assets on Solomon Island's Malaita Island. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we couldn't really travel and conduct hydraulic survey of structures on the ground and assess the overall flooding overspill risks. However, the modeling work identified the flooding risk exposure of the road assets on Malaita based on the location of assets and their topographies, which could guide the prioritization of future hydraulic studies. So once we have a clear understanding of the projected climate hazards, now it's really how can we use it for decision making? The idea is really simple. You know where the assets are, you know their condition, and then you overlay that with your climatic and seismic hazard maps that will give you, where are the most vulnerable assets located. And on top of that, you use data such as the relative criticality of road sections in terms of providing access to schools, hospitals, services, and the evacuation road, etc. You come up with a criticality assessment result for your road sections. Combine these two, it will give you which roads that should be prioritized most. Sorry, next slides. I actually talked about these slides already. It's about prioritization. Next slides, please. Yeah, lastly, I just want to say that, the tool of visualization is really critical. We see in Solomon Islands, by having the tools you see on the slides, it really visualizes for the decision makers where your vulnerable and critical assets locate. And that helps to narrow down your presentation list. This visualization tool make it very intuitive for the decision makers understand what are the risks, how they should deal with it, and how they should prioritize. Next slide, please. Condition programming, I believe everyone is familiar with IDEA. So we proposed a framework. I will not go in detail on that. Next slide, please. Lastly, I think this is important. What we did is look into human resources and skill set, because all the changes you propose eventually comes down to people implementing them. MIT is similar to all the other agencies in the region. They suffer from human resources shortage. So what we did is to propose a competence framework that matches all the functions we propose under RAMF and identify what type of skills, what level of staff they would require. And along with that, we attach a broader description of terms of references. This is very well received by the permanent secretary of MIT because he can directly use that to justify his human resources demand at the central government. Let me stop here. This is all for my presentation. Thank you. Sorry for taking too long.
Thank you so much, Bowen. That's very interesting presentation. And I just would like to have a comment that we have currently, we have ongoing SIRA program, a Solomon Island Road and Aviation Project in the countries. And we will continue to implement the recommended activities as, just like continuing what Bowen just, presented to you and focusing maybe on the data management, the, enhancement of the system. And especially we would also work on the NTF, the National Transport Funding, which is one of the recommendation and ASA, just to improve the funding or financing mechanism in the country as well. And of course, capacity building, we will have a lot of opportunity to implement that under the SIRA program. Let me now turn over to Fred. As I mentioned previously, in those three countries, we just focus on the road sector, but we all know that recently, the supply chains disruption is very much concern from all over the world, and what will be the impacts from the climate change and national disaster to supply chains in aviation and maritime sector, which is the very is a kind of focus area in Cape Verde, and Fred would be presenting the study from ASA in Cape Verde. Over to you, Fred. Thanks.
Very much, Bowen. Good morning, good evening to everyone. While Jiang just put my slides on, thank you, Jiang. As Bowen mentioned, actually the decision to do the Cabo Verde study happened way before the pandemic, and we are somehow, air quoting here, pleased to see that it was a good decision to look at supply chain disruptions due to disasters and natural hazards and climate risks. We do see actually this happening more and more right now, unfortunately with COVID, but actually proven a right decision for our team to actually go ahead and pursue that case study in Cabo Verde. Next one, please. So Cabo Verde is basically like these small island development states just by Africa in the mid-Atlantic. A series of islands, as you can see here on the right-hand side of the picture. And once we were actually doing this study, starting to do the selection of the countries, as Bowen mentioned, remember that I guess Niels, our PM GFDR, he was a global lead for the DRM team, and we consulted him because we wanted to do a case study in Africa. So he suggested this one There was actually DRM work going on in the country, as well as some transport IPF being implemented as well. And once we approached the team there on the ground, the decision was, let's focus instead of roads, because we're already doing lots of work in the roads. Let's focus on the airports and ports. By that time, Cabo Verde, by right now, actually, Cabo Verde has this big strategic development to be kind of like a hub in the Mid-Atlantic. So they will rely quite a lot on airports and ports for that strategy to be implemented. Next one, please. So in terms of the context, basically, we basically, like, our problem proposal was basically trying to understand better the logistics and supply chain disruption in the country. And beyond that, trying to have a multimodal transport knowledge as well. As Bowen mentioned, I think the World Bank Group has been doing quite a lot once it comes to roads, urban roads as well, and urban mobility. But we're lacking quite a lot understanding on airports and ports. Back in the day, we had like a BBL maybe 5 years ago, and Samuel Waba, our director, actually challenged us to actually go ahead and try to come with like novel studies on transport as well. So that's another reason that actually pushed us to actually do this one. In terms of the proposed methodology, very briefly, this is fundamented in 3 different pillars. Supply chain modeling, disaster impacts modeling, and a game simulation for improved decision making. I'll go quickly through all these 3 pillars, and you're going to see different than the presentation that Boeing gave. I would say this is a much more like simple approach, but using a simple tool to actually address complex problems. Next one, please. In terms of the supply chain, basically, we use like an agent-based simulation. I'm not going to go into details here. We did have like a professor from Australia, University of Melbourne, doing this for us, along with some students. So basically, what we're looking at the supply chain modeling to understand the inventory levels, right? So how actually goods are actually stored, arrive in the country, and distributed using not only the ports and airports, but as well as the roads. And again, like there is actually a technical assistance being delivered or already delivered once it comes to the road vulnerability in Cabo Verde. So there was kind of a good combination in those type of studies. So the idea actually to use the supply chain modeling to predict some of the benefits of strengthening, some of the key nodes in the system. And finally, that would ultimately help us and the government to develop some sort of investment plans. Next one, please. Very briefly, this is, an overall picture, nothing complex here. Lots of trade that happens between Cabo Verde and the European continent. So basically, this arrives in the domestic shipping companies in Europe. This are sent to the international ports and airports in Cabo Verde. And then you see that basically happens, this flow that goes up to the warehouses and then goes to the retailers. So this is kind of like a simple representation of the supply chain. Right now, we understand much better if one of these links are broken, how much headache you can actually have in terms of like managing those systems and those flows. And the idea here back in the day was actually how to link and break some of these links, basically due to occurrence of a disaster or some sort of a challenge because of climate risks. Next one, please. So this is actually a representation on, this is a real simulation on in terms of how inventory levels fluctuates in San Vicente, which is one of the islands. So this is just like a representation that we modeled. Again, the supply chain model has been done using the major products that are imported or exported from Cabo Verde. In this case here, we do see like a cement in terms of tons and how that fluctuates on the warehouses. Next one, please. So leaving behind the first pillar and looking at the second one, which is the disaster risk modeling scenarios. Again, we try actually to be as comprehensive as possible. So that's why we use scenarios. Of course, this actually does not bring us to exactly the understanding on necessarily the real vulnerability of ports and airports due to some of the natural hazards that we have in Cabo Verde, but has proven to be a very interesting modeling approach to combine with the supply chain modeling. Next one, please. So the way that we basically link both the disaster modeling and the supply chain, represented here as freight and logistics modeling, was basically looking at the basic infrastructure capacity and the hazards event looking at the past. So basically we're looking at what we have in terms of airports and ports in terms of vulnerability. We create some damage scenarios based on existing already past events. And then we assume, or like we model, some of the residual infrastructure capacity. So basically what we're saying is like once a volcanic eruption happens, what actually is going to create as a problem, you know, for a given airport, or once like a tsunami happens, how the port would actually have its capacity affected. Then we go for the recovery model, basically looking at the capacity that the government has actually to restructure and to repair those key systems, airports and ports in this case. Then we have a temporal infrastructure capacity, you know, basically what it happens, like the capacity for airports and ports, they actually increase over time. And then we plug all that information into the supply chain. So basically we're looking at the nodes at the supply chain, and by having reduced capacity at those nodes, how that actually impacts the supply chain. So basically what we see nowadays with COVID, but in that case, generated by a natural hazard. The next one, this is basically fundamented on what we have seen in reality. So this is a representation, if you see at the solid line that goes down on April 95, this is Kobe port, and Kobe port has been, of course, affected by 1995 Kobe earthquake. And if you see, it has never managed to go back to that initial capacity that they have in terms of like representation in Japan. That actually basically our development assumption or our hypothesis for Cabo Verde, which is if you want to become a hub in the Mid-Atlantic, you have to ensure reliability for those infrastructure that you're offering, either through commercial relationships with South America or Northern America and Central America, as well as Europe, also in the vital, important touristic activities that they have. Next one, please. We also actually have seen some of this evidence before going to the next slide, which is like this is Christchurch earthquake 2011. If we take too long to actually restore the capacity, it changed reality dramatically. This is a view of the city center, left-hand side, immediately after the earthquake. And then you see what's happening nowadays, 10 years or 11 years afterwards, that basically all the business left, like the city center, there's a new city center going on, right? So most of these businesses are migrating somewhere else, pretty much what happened maybe for Kobe port, and then it goes somewhere else. And once that infrastructure is reestablished to the initial capacity, if ever, you're not going to be able to actually restore the growth pattern that we had before the event. Next one, please. So basically what we do, we created some sort of like scenarios in which we assume different recovery curves. Okay, so we have here a graph that basically represents if you have an earthquake without strengthening and with strengthening. So this is kind of like a basic assumption that we have in the modeling approach. Next one, please. So just as a representation, once we manage to actually create this both modeling approach for the supply chain and the different disaster scenarios, we came with information like this one. So what we have basically here is the period of zero inventory. So basically, when it happens in an earthquake, what this graph represents here in the case of San Vicente, and that's basically on our modeling, you're going to start having moments that you will not have inventory. So basically you have an empty shelf, right? So that's what we have in, for instance, baby formula in the US, that can happen with cement in this case in Cabo Verde, and then you have the whole impact. Next one, please. So once we start plugging the assumptions that we have for with strengthening some of the warehouses, some of the airports and ports, we start realizing that some of the zero periods are actually reduced, right? Of course, this is based on some of the assumptions that we have in terms of the capacity to respond, the capacity to restore the real capacity at the ports and airports. But again, it's just a way to prove to the decision makers that investment in resilience is indeed investment in development. Next one, please. And that's basically a combination of on this case for Porto Fogo, which is one port in one of the islands that we have a volcano. So if you have the regional, basically the current situation, compare when we have a volcanic eruption and with strengthening. Next one, please. Final example before I come into my last port. The last portion is, again, Boa Vista Airport, same simulations, just proving how useful resilience can be. Next one, please. So the idea, as I mentioned, we do have a series of assumptions. This is a modeling approach. We have like limitations in terms of data on historical events. We have limitation of data in terms of like the flows of goods between the ports and airports. And that's, next one, please. Thank you, Jiang. So basically what we created was an application that allows basically the end user to play with different scenarios. The idea here is not to give an exact number once it comes to different disaster situations. So if you see here the graph, so we look at capacity of ports, the pre-disaster capacity, and once you model different types of disaster 1, 2, and 3, for instance, you start having different results, as well as when you plug in your recovery capacity. Why are we doing this? Basically because we want to allow the government authorities to actually play with those scenarios and understand where the optimum decision-making in terms of investments can be. Next one, please. This is just a visualization of how this tool looks like. So again, the idea here is to give total freedom to the end user. Okay, next one, please. Zhang, I'll be wrapping up shortly, okay? So we have like the different inputs that the end user can input in the system to run the simulations. We can go from storms, hurricanes, earthquake, and volcanic eruptions. Of course, there's quite a lot happening behind the scenes. So again, it's not just like creating graphs here. There's actually the modeling portion that was done for both supply chain and the natural hazard and disaster simulations. Next one, please. A couple more slides, Zhang. So for each different scenario, you can insert characteristics of intensity, duration, coverage, so on and so forth. Next one. You also create these different, next one, please. Thank you. So, and then you have the dashboard that presents you the simulation and the recovery budget allocation, so on and so forth. So I have 2 more slides on. Next one, please. So the idea again here was basically look at supply chain modeling, looking at disaster simulation in terms of scenarios, and actually create some sort of like infrastructure recovery curves. So basically on trying to understand the vulnerability that we have in terms of the infrastructure that can be affected by the disaster. That would help dramatically the government to start discussing what would be the best strategy for allocation of resources to increase resilience on both airports and ports in Cabo Verde. Next and final slide. And what we did was literally what we call a serious game simulation that combined with the modeling or the mathematical portion of these technical systems, we actually could bring people to the table and generate like scenarios in which each player will play a different role and will be requested to make some decisions to allocate resources on airports and ports to increase resilience. So that was done with a firm that's located in Boston. It's a common approach for us from the DRM community to work with this game simulation to understand the complexity of the decision making. Again, thank you very much. Next one, thank you very much. That's my email if you guys want to reach out, but basically it was a very interesting case for us, right, Zhang and team, to bring a different perspective into resilience and transport in the small and developing states. It was actually, as well, just to close here, an opportunity that the Japan World Bank program and GFEI has given to us in terms of like GPs and transport and DRM to explore these ideas and build on this long-lasting work that we have been doing. Back to you, Zhang.
Thank you so much, Fred. That's very interesting. I think it's not only in terms of resilience of the supply chain for the, under the impacts of climate change and natural hazard, but I think if you can use the modeling, just to make sure that you can increase or improve the efficiency of supply chain. I think that would be another application of the modeling. I would like to say that, because you don't have, enough time for presentation in details of all the activities we implement in those 4 countries. But, please, if anyone interested in having details of each activity, so please contact us. We have, reports. As I mentioned, we have reports in individual countries in very much detail, and, we can share with you, of course. And while Zhang is going to share back the main presentation, I would like to just summarize of the activities we implemented in Vanuatu. Actually, in Vanuatu and Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, we didn't. I mean, we try to use very small part of the ASA funding to implement those activities in those 2 countries. But actually, we are going to use lots of funding under the IPF. They very closely link IPF in those 2 countries to implement the recommended activities. For example, in Vanuatu, we are going to implement, next slide, in Vanuatu, we are going to focus under the IPF, Vanuatu Climate Resilient Transport Project, to focus on 4 areas: that data management strategically, how we can, country can collect the data and manage them, strategically. Another one is vulnerability assessment. Of course, as similarly to what we did in Solon Island as well, and how to improve the current system, the RIMS. They have road management information system in the country right now, and then how we can promote it or enhance it to be the resilient asset management system. And of course, the capacity building. It's a lot of requests or demand from the countries in terms of how they can improve their capacity in the country so that they can manage their own system. After we left, actually that's the main question from the client country, and also I think from the team as well. After we leave, after the ASA or after the project, how the our client countries can manage themselves by themselves the system. And of course, next slide, Dan, and Saint Vincent is the same. Diagnostic process, road asset management system. And so, we try to promote a kind of web-based application for them to manage the road and bridge assessment systems, which actually focusing very much in terms of data management, and so, data collection and data management based on the web. And yeah, so next slide, please. And, because of the time, I think, I just would like to leave this, the lesson learned in terms of, I mean, the lesson learned for us to discuss over the next session, which is discussion session. And I would like to invite Karen from DM and also Kumlaila from transport, to go over the discussion for us to see what would be the applicability from what we have done in those 4 countries and under this ASA, applicability for other SIDS countries, and also what would be the chance or opportunities for us, for the team and for the bank to replicate those activities implemented into other countries. And next step as well, and they would both Karen and Kunwaila will bring their broad expertise, knowledge and experience working in those countries, including the fragile countries, into our discussion. So let me leave the floor to Karen and Kunwaila for our discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Zhang and team. Hi, good evening, good night, good morning. I am Karen Charles. I'm a senior disaster risk management specialist, currently in the Africa region. But over the past 10 years, I have worked on disaster risk management and climate change adaptation, focusing on small states, mainly in the Caribbean and now in the Indian Ocean. I would like to start by commending the team on the good work that they have done, which I believe will have real positive impacts in the countries. In my remarks, I'd like to touch upon three main points made by the previous presenters. One, on the importance of transport networks in SIDS, particularly in light of disasters faced. On the need to tailor solutions to the SIDS context, and the need for further analysis on climate financing options for resilient transport investments. The transport sector is critical for all countries, but particularly for SIDS, as many are comprised of coastal communities connected through the road network. Due to their often rugged topography, there is not much redundancy in the primary road network. As such, when there is road failure, many are disconnected, or commute times can double or triple. The secondary road networks are usually underdeveloped, and so vehicles can be damaged after using these roads. And in many cases, big vehicles, such as ambulances, are unable to use many of the secondary roads, which is challenging in emergencies. SIDS are also highly exposed to natural hazards and impacts of climate change, particularly sea level rise. And given a personal example, in 2014, excessive rainfall caused significant damage to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, about 50% of GDP, 80% of which was from the transport sector. And I was on the ground days after the event and saw bridges demolished, roads destroyed, and some of the poorest communities practically stranded and unable to access markets and services. So therefore, it's critical that we strengthen our transport infrastructure. And it is key for allowing countries to build resilience and to recover from disaster events. And countries know this, no? Most times when we talk to chief engineers about building resilience, the infrastructure that they want to focus on is the road network and related drainage. And this highlights the need for continued collaboration across GPs, and particularly URL and transport GPs, to ensure that disaster risk information is being integrated in transport projects and transport and engineering considerations are integrated into disaster risk management projects. If I could, another thing I want to commend the team on is applying this SOFT approach, which provided countries with easy, simple to use mobile apps, which allowed the data collection, but also allowed a tool for updating databases that was easy to use and update. You know, people often say that the Caribbean has low capacity, and I want to delve into that a little bit, because the low capacity that many of small island states face isn't from lack of technical capacity, but it's from lack of people. And so you have really strong technical people who are just doing too much. They're doing the jobs of 4 or 5 people, and they just don't have the time to do all the things that is needed. And so having this tool, which is easy to use, easy to update, and uses technology that's already existing and utilized often is critical. So I commend the team on this one way of tailoring the product for the country context. One thing I would like to challenge the team on is a little bit on how do you finance resilient infrastructure investments for small island states. Many SIDS are highly indebted and economic conditions have worsened in light of the global crises and particularly reduction in tourism, which is often a main economy in these countries. And so understanding the cost of resilient transport systems is critical, but also how do they finance it? And I know there's a tool that helps with the budgeting for national processes, but there's a lot of global climate financing. And I would like to hear from the team if they did any research on how countries can access climate financing, particularly grants, but also concessional loans, and how can they integrate that as part of their transport planning, because in-country resources are not adequate. The needs and demands are high. So how do we support our countries in accessing other financing, grants or concessional financing in order to advance resilient climate? Another thing I want to address is how did the team deal with uncertainty? Because you mentioned resilient TAMS addresses how do we inform decision makers, right? How do we get information to decision makers? But I caution, because there could be a sense, right? If I build this bridge for this amount of money, then if anything happens, this bridge will withstand it. But there's always that uncertainty. So how was that communicated? And that there's still a need for disaster risk financing tools and other risk financing mechanisms that can't be engineered away. So it'd be interesting to hear from the team how they address this. And finally, I just want to end on a positive note, because I spoke about, the storm, the excessive rainfall in St. Vincent. But last year in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, there was a volcano, La Soufrière volcano, had an explosive eruption, and transport infrastructure improved through World Bank projects, including the rehabilitation of the road network and the reconstruction of Chateaubriand Jetty, allowed people to be evacuated from high-risk areas by land and by sea. So all persons who wanted to be evacuated were able to leave, and there were no reported deaths as a result of this. So a clear example of how more resilient transport infrastructure can actually save lives, how we can help build resilience. And so I end by thanking the team and for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to the conversation that will come after. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Over to you, Kunwaida.
Well, good morning, good evening, colleagues, wherever you are. It's a bit late here in DC, and certainly well beyond my bedtime. But the subject of this PBL, if I may say, brown bag dinner or post-dinner conversation is extremely relevant. Most of the small island and developing states are counted among us the FCS, another word which is acronym which is used in the bank, fragile and conflict affected states. That's an area where I've been working on for quite some time in the GP, in the transport GP. So most of the countries which were named here are part of that list as well. So within that, the focus had primarily been on the violence dimension. The Somalias of the world, they engage greater attention, the Yemens, Afghanistans, some of the countries where I've been working on. But your work, the work that this team had put forth, it brings a timely focus on small island developing states. So congratulations to you all. You have worked over the past several years, so timely in a way. But certainly good beginning has been made, which can further be built upon. In terms of where we are under the Paris Agreement, all countries are mandated and submit their nationally determined contribution, NDCs, every 5 years, detailing their climate targets and their contribution towards achieving the goals of Paris Agreement. And on the other hand, the small island developing states, they contribute minuscule emissions. But at the receiving end of the global warming in terms of rising sea levels and extreme weather events, significantly more. And it's an existentialist threat to many of those. So the Maldives of the world, when they are holding protests, so they highlight the challenges that these countries face. And when specifically the work that has been done in terms of the road projects, they have been found to produce the GHG emissions at different stages, right from the construction on to operations. However, compared to high income and middle income countries, the SIDS, I hope I'm pronouncing this acronym correctly, the small island and developing states, road construction and rehabilitation offer early entry point. I don't think, based on a little I have read, operations would offer the same opportunity to minimize the loss of resources, to reduce waste generation, to enable recycling of the materials, so on and so forth. Whereas in high-income countries, nearly 50% of the NDC mitigation measures are directly coming from fuel efficiency improvement or decarbonizing fuel, or more correctly said, the improved strategies. In the middle-income countries, on the other hand, you tend to rely more heavily on public transport, the shift strategy to mitigate some of those. And when we come to these developing countries or the small island, specifically in this particular instance, I think infrastructure does offer probably the best entry point, the area that you have focused on. So congratulations on identifying it way earlier than most of us could. So in that sense, your work is really apt. Now, specifically on the work that has been done so far. So some of the questions which you must have considered, and also for broader group to delve into. How much is the hardening of infrastructure vis-a-vis adaptation? This requires further probing. Can you really make road infrastructure planning future-proof, as was mentioned by, I forget the name, sorry guys, Bowen, yeah. He noted in his slide that the endeavor is to make road infrastructure planning future-proof. Can you really do it? Does the inherent uncertainty attached to climate change, as was noted by Karen, and the work which has been done elsewhere, is it even possible? So in that sense, climate change is still evolving, especially the extreme weather events and the uncertainty attached to those at a local level, not at a global level, but specific to a particular landmass. That vis-a-vis the design life of a road asset or any transport asset for that matter, that has inherent challenges attached. How much of the hardening is required now? The climate change at that particular location, with how much certainty you could predict that that's going to happen. You have multiple models, each one would give a different output. In that sense, I would like to highlight the work which was done in Mozambique, because Ben is aware of that. He was involved. That was regarding adaptation. We did dwell on the uncertainty aspects to look at what are the best possible scenarios that we could build the infrastructure, but also the adaptation work that was undertaken there vis-a-vis the climate change. It was the Limpopo Valley where it was attempted, where entire road infrastructure was decimated in 2012 floods, if I recall that correctly. So typically you build the roads above HFL. That's a done thing. And another thing which is peculiar to Mozambique in that look of wood is there are no stone aggregates. There are no aggregates available. So you basically build the road with sand, or you transport material over 800 kilometers. So what was attempted there was to start building the road at the ground level. So let the disruption to the traffic happen over a period of flooding. That infrastructure built in 2012-13 has withstood at least 2 floods. It is still evolving. More experience or more data is required to see whether that holds promise in future. So it's those ideas, whether you could build that into the resilient design standard that was mentioned, as one of the options going forward. So those are the areas that need to be explored a little more. So it'll be great to hear how you guys are thinking in terms of broadening this, in terms of carrying on the follow-up work. The contingency planning and associated financing will get another area. Who will foot the bill for this? Are you going to be looking at IFIs or the richer nations? So some of that could be brought onto these small island states. Who exactly is going to foot the bill in terms of providing or financing these assets in these countries? I think Karen also noted this specific point, how it is to go. And then I think given the time that we have and also to broaden the discussion, I'll limit myself to my final point. Investment in wider areas of transport infrastructure, going beyond roads, using road network as an ancillary to make available greater choices to the travelers, including cabotage, including ports as have been done in Cape Verde, airports, light rail, biking, pedestrian improvement. All those need to be factored in order to reduce the need in itself for vehicle kilometers traveled. And that in itself, if you are building other complementarities, could improve the overall resilience of the transport network. So focusing on one aspect may make it even more prone to its negative impact once that particular network is disrupted. Whereas building a broader based network system could help to mitigate or adapt to the challenge. I think in that sense, probably engaging with other international organizations like International Maritime Organization or International Civil Aviation Organization. Those may be future areas that you may consider as you take your work forward. I'll stop here, and thanks again for providing this opportunity to participate. Given the time, it is because of my topical interest and my own interest in this area, sitting and trying to learn from you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kunwaida. And I think both Karen and Kunwaida, you bring in the, a vast, experience and also expertise, in the countries and also area you have been working on. And that would be very useful for the team to learn and also, to take into consideration or, take into account when we move to the next stage, working in SID, in other SID, to promote the program that we have been working on. I think, the financing, I mean, just, let me, because of the timing, we are running out of the time. So let me just, on behalf of the team, share some of the, remarks of from your what you have raised in terms of financing and also what's next steps and certainly something like that, and then we can move on. I think financing of the program, or activities in those SID. That's one of the area we would like to do under this ASA. But as I mentioned from the beginning, that there is a kind of impacts from the COVID-19, and we not have a kind of engaged with the strongly engaged from the clients, and also of course in terms of coordination with other agency or something like that. So that's why and also in terms of the timing, we did not have a chance to go in deeply in terms of the financing mechanism for the program. But I think, some of the options we can explore in the future that, of course, under the bank, we have some facilities, GFDR, climate finance, some of the area that Bowen has worked in climate financing, something. And also, of course, as Kunwaila, you just mentioned about international donors. And actually, that's what we have been doing, very closely or collaboratively with the other international donors in those countries, just to make sure that we can maximize the financing, mobilization to the countries. And, based on the recommended activities we propose in the countries, how we can use or mobilize, or have the country mobilize the financing to implement those activities. And I think, for example, we just want to take a good example in Vanuatu that we have worked very closely with the DFAT, the Australian donors, and just because they are the reason is that one is that because they are very active in this area in the country, but also we have they, and also actually they share the same vision with us in terms of how we can promote and enhance the current system toward the resiliency. So that's why and also they do have their own program as well. And I think we all already agree with them that in next steps or future or in the coming program, we will work together as well, just to implement the recommended activities and then to see what would be the impacts on that. They do have some kind of sample, like a pavement, like a sample, self-testing of the pavement, just to see whether the road network in Vanuatu would be resilient based on the dry and pavement, structure under their program. And so we bring in to, maximize or to improve or enhance the current system that was developed by Australian donor in that. As I mentioned, they developed the road management information system, RIMS, in the countries, and we bring in the kind of resiliency, in for that system, so that we can have a better or resilient system in the country. So I think that's some of the option we can explore in the future, and of course based on the availability of the funding and how we can bring in our proposal to those agencies so that we can help the country mobilize the financing for that. I think uncertainty, yes, I mean that's some kind of as Bowen in Bowen's presentation, that's something we could do just to make sure that we can predict a kind of in the future, like projection of the scenario in the future, and then we can translate into the management of the transport system in the countries. And I think as Bowen just mentioned, that's a kind of pavement for us to continue working with the client in those countries, just to make sure that once we win the program or improve the road network toward resiliencies, we have just a kind of projected data and information, just and also to bring in the system, and then to just it's a kind of reducing the risk in the future, and also of course reducing a kind of uncertainties in the future as well. And based on the information and data from that, the decision maker can have their can make their own decision based on such uncertainty scenario. And I mean in the future, I think based on the outcomes of this ASA, we committed to work to continue working with our client countries. As I mentioned, we do have ongoing IPF. The bank is for example in Vanuatu we have around 120 millions. Bowen and I myself are working on it. We have Solomon Island 140 millions. Lots of and also in St. Vincent, as Karen just mentioned, we are DM from DIM program. We are building another project on program just to make sure that we can have the client to address the climate resiliencies in the countries under the program, One Bank program as well. So I think there's some kind of many kinds of I mean the areas that we can work on, or in collaboration with between DIM and transport sector, and also with international donors in those countries, just to promote the climate resiliency in transport sector. So, but I mean there's we can have another kind of offline discussion if anyone interested in having a kind of this further discussion with the team on this. And sorry for the time limitation, so we need to move on. And thank you so much for this discussion. And we do hope that we can receive a lot more questions and thoughts as well, so that we could share in the future offline after we have this seminar. Let me move on.
So
Zhang,
sorry.
go ahead.
This is Bowen. Can I take 2
minutes, yeah.
minutes just
2
to
minutes, yeah.
add on few critical points on financing and uncertainty? I think those are really question to the heart. On financing, I think one paradigm shift we need to embark on from experiencing Solomon Islands is really we need to help the countries fixing their institutional setup before we ask for more money from donors, right? If you don't have a system there where you link your investment with the performance, improved performance of roads, and have that level of accountability, no donors will be interested to put more money there, right? For instance, in Solomon Islands, ADB has been invested heavily on a maintenance program over the past few years. Then they decided to pull off because there's no system in place to tell them their money spent on resilience on the road is yielding the effect that they anticipated. Therefore, building that asset management system that link with input and outcome is critical. So that's the first point. I think before we ask for any further mobilization as climate finance or donor grants, have that homework done robustly within the country is the critical first step. In terms of uncertainty, I would say really it's a matter of comparing with what, right? We're not comparing with a perfection future. We're comparing with what is conventionally done. Conventionally done is people will look into the historical rainfall data and assuming that's going to be the case and design their asset in such way. And it's not going to be climate proof. And therefore, the efforts like climate downscaling and projection will help. Now, still, of course, the uncertainty remains in downscaling processes. We can do BIOS corrections, a lot of methods out there. But the bottom line is you will be able to distill some no regrets interventions, right? For instance, in Solomon's cases we just presented, from a downscaling across the scenarios and across the models, what it shows is average rainfall, annual rainfall will decrease. And that indicating perhaps in the future, you can spend less money in building the network level resilience towards flooding. But what it also shows that extreme precipitation risk remains. So that means you can channel those saved resources from pave everywhere to most vulnerable sections. The watershed, access near watershed, with hilly topographies, etc. So those type of projection will help inform relocating of resources to where it needs. Let me stop here. Thanks.
Many thanks, Bowen. So let's move on. So Zhang, can you share Eric's presentation? And as I mentioned, building capacity is one of the very critical area that the high demand from our client as well. And we have, IRF, International Road Federation, working very closely with our OLC, Open Learning Campus, to develop an online training courses. And, actually this one, we see that, now, the clients staff, they don't have much time. They have very limited number of people and they can't, it's difficult for them to go to a class, and then that's why online courses would be very, very much, useful for them so that they can access any time to, run through the course, and then at the end, once they pass the exam, they can receive the certificate from the World Bank as well. So let me hand over the floor to Eric. Eric is senior advisor at the International Road Federation, who is, working with Shayla. Shayla is our lead specialist from the ONC to build this course. And over to you, Eric, and you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Doug. I appreciate it. Pleasure, everyone, working with you tonight and this morning, this afternoon over there in the East. My name is Eric Cook, as Doug introduced, Senior Advisor here at the International Road Federation. And first of all, I want to say, Doug, thank you for the opportunity to join everyone tonight. And thanks again for the working with you on that project. I really enjoyed working with you and Fred and Maria on it. I think we had a wonderful product as we have put out to our country clients out there in the SIDS footprint. So first of all, I just thought if it's okay with you, Doug, just a real quick background on IRF, and then I'll go through the e-course so everybody has kind of a flavor of what to expect and enjoying that course. So at the IRF, it is a nonprofit industry association. It's been around since 1948. Our vision is better roads, better world. We serve the industry in three ways: in advocacy, in outreach, and in training. And our training, we kind of focus across the road agency as you would look at implementation of road infrastructure from bitumen, from asphalts, concrete, bridges, but also into integrity and integrity management and ethics. ESG is a new workshop that we have in development, and then of course the resilient transport training that we have as well. In addition, that's supporting this e-course we developed. And from our outreach that we do is primarily with our webinars and our conferences. We have a touch on the climate and resiliency in road infra in our conferences, and a lot of our conferences and the professionals that speak at our conferences engage in our workshops, in our formal training, in what here at IRF we would call a for professionals by professionals. Industry brings the issues, and industry brings solutions to those issues so that we can kind of learn from each other. Another example of some roads and climate outreach was at our world meeting last year in Dubai. At that world meeting, Fred was able to join us over there. It was kind of for here at IRF was kind of a capstone of working with the bank with the e-course and development of the resilient transport in SIDS. Is to further that discussion beyond that project. Here at IRF, we are looking to stand up a sustainable and resilient transport committee. We're looking to launch that in June at our Caribbean Regional Congress, which is being held in Barbados with the Caribbean Development Bank, 7 to 10 June. Okay, back to our training workshops in terms of resiliency. These two workshops, we have a live workshop, a resident workshop, and we put it online in 2020 on our building climate resilience in the roads and transport infrastructure. This was kind of the foundation from the IRF side, from the for professionals by professionals mantra to be able to bring that to the e-course. But of course, our seminal document, our reference document, main reference document being the Climate and Disaster Resilient Small Island Development States Call for Action served as the basis for developing the technical content. So kind of the target audience that we looked at for developing the course was two folks. Primarily was the new engineer. That's going to be the highway engineer, design engineer, construction engineer, or a road asset manager. So those may be new to integrating climate and resilience and sustainability into their day-to-day work. But also we want to keep an ear towards the senior engineer that's very familiar with a lot of the technical work, perhaps has done a little bit of the resilience work into their maintenance schedules. But at times, as all of us as professionals, we want to revisit our professional development to keep our skills alive. So the e-course, a little bit done. What I thought I'd do is I've got some snapshots from each of the modules. So I'm just going to share those with everybody so they can have a little bit of a flavor of what to expect as they advise some of their country clients on, recommending the e-course and integrating that in their workforce development. So the e-course is broken down into 3 modules, and it's bookmarked with an intro and a intro module and a summary module at the end. There is a final exam at the end of the course, but the 3 modules, one on climate change, disaster risk management, kind of sets up the topic. The second module looking at the asset management systems, and the third module looking at the framework and integrating climate change throughout the life cycle, the transport infrastructure life cycle. So the overarching learning objectives: evaluating climate change impacts, looking at transport asset management systems, and looking at methods, techniques, and frameworks, kind of the tools of the trades, as Ben was advising there in the opening remarks. The seminal references we have here, primarily leveraging the good work at the World Bank, but also looking outside from PARC and AASHTO to get some of their road asset management guide into the course as well. So a couple snapshots, and I'll go through these pretty quickly from Module 1 to Module 3. There's 4 learning objectives in Module 1, kind of setting up the topic of climate change and what is the disaster risk in SIDS, looking at different risk management systems, typical constraints and challenges faced in SIDS. We'll introduce each of the modules with a little bit of a motivator in terms of why is the topic or the particular module critical to the course participant. We'll introduce some case studies to give a little background, a little flavor into the technical journey. And we'll also have some knowledge checks along the way throughout the modules so we can get some feedback to the participant on how well the knowledge is being captured. Again, we'll have some pop-up, some technical case studies. It could be from a disaster event, or it could be an example of the tools and techniques is able for the viewer to see. We've also integrated some more of the some background and some the trends of climate, the trends of impact. Kind of touches on what Bowen was talking there very wisely on the financial impacts and how this is increasing in tempo from what we see from the insurance industry is seeing some needs to build the resilient assets up. Also integrating some other tools from the Think Hazard Climate Change Knowledge Portal. Not getting too detailed on how the tools work and getting too in depth, but more of allowing the participant to see there's lots of tools out there within the World Bank portals, within the marketplace that they can leverage outside of the e-course. Another example here in the module 1 of taking a journey from reconstruction through the import of long lead times for material supplies, as Colwinder was talking about. Some of that crushed aggregates kind of short in supply in the SIDS and some of the SID footprints, and integrating some of the sustainability piece with that as well. Then we summarize each of the modules. We kind of wrap up what was covered in that module, and then we'll close out with a module quiz. Each of the modules will have an end of module quiz, and then we'll finish that up with an end of course quiz. Doug, what I'll do now, I'll just kind of go through. I've got all 3 modules, but I'm going to go through those real quick so I can get I've got time there for Niels to wrap it up. But in module 2, we're looking at the asset management system. We're going to really emphasize that putting some upfront OPEX into the maintenance is going to save some money over the long term. Kind of flatten out those investment needs over the long horizon of which our asset management system is going to support. So we're going to start up at a policy level, give a little insights into what is a transport asset management system. Re-emphasize that spending $5 up front is going to save that $25 in that base course and the full depth pavement repair in the long run. And then we transition a little bit in terms of the water and the impact of drainage and how critical that is to road infrastructure. We're going to tie a little bit into the technical piece right here, just to bring in some of the drainage engineering and the highway engineering into the course, kind of emphasizing the 2 challenges that we have, one being velocity and mountainous terrains with all the energy, and then the flow challenge in the flat terrain. And we just don't have the inventory to be able to move that water. A little bit of practical techniques and procedures that engineers can use. Some of these will be very familiar with some senior engineers, but for newer engineers and those are coming into the industry, understanding that the turnover is quite high in our industry, that these are some of the techniques, and the course does provide some of these experiences or techniques that come from experience. Okay, I'll really emphasize, as Karen was talking about, on drainage, that our drainage structures, whether it's a large box culvert or whether it's a bridge, we lose one asset of those classes, then we've lost severity. So we put some emphasis on that, and we wrap up the module. And at end of module quiz, at each of the modules also has specific references, and we identify those with each of the modules as well. On module 3, we're going to look at wrapping up the course here, looking at some more case studies. We're introduce the transport lifecycle framework, and they're going to look at some methods and techniques for managing the climate risk impact on transport assets. We'll show the transport asset management capacity here from the asset extent, performance levels, etc. And then we'll look at the survey some surveys that were done in the 2 regions there in the Pacific region and the Caribbean region, kind of get some feedback of that from existing assets and their resiliency and how, kind of a motivator to what we need to do for leveraging the e-course and moving into our roads that are under management now. So we've touched earlier on the diagnostic and report and a transition plan, so we've included that in the e-course as well. 2 case studies here, one from the Solomon Islands and Vanuatu on the diagnostic, and then we wrap that up with the transition plans. The pop-ups there on the click here to reads will give more information, more detailed information for the e-course viewer. Knowledge checks throughout just to kind of reinforce the information exchange. We'll get a little bit into the middle part of the module here. So we're introduced at the transport infrastructure lifecycle. We go through each of the 4 phases, and then we cap that off with the institutional capacity and coordination. We finish up the module here looking at the 4 recommended actions for TAMs and SIDS, looking at developing the needs assessment and transition plans, deploying the selected solutions, certainly the capacity building, and the net fundraising that we talked about earlier there in the discussion session. Fred, we've got your case study here in the e-course, looking at the simulation tool. So we have a couple slides in the e-course, so they have an introduction to that, and then a reference to the case study here specifically and the tool, so they can use that as a resource as well. And then we wrap it up with some key points. Into module quiz, further references for those particular module objectives. Then we finish up the course. We do a wrap up for all the modules. We do have some surveys that are integrated in the e-course on understanding, it's kind of a self-awareness or capacity assessment of their understanding. And then we look at, the future. What are some future courses or some needs that the individual and the highway engineer, the asset manager, et cetera, may need. So we get some feedback loops from the users on the e-course itself. Then we wrap it up with further references as they move on from the e-course, and then we conclude with the final exam. So, Dung, I hope that's comprehensive enough for everybody. I hope it went too rapid fire. If there's any questions, feel free to reach out to me here at the International Road Federation. Dung, thanks again for the invitation to meet with everyone tonight and chat about the e-course. It was a wonderful project. Look forward to working with you guys here in the future, and hope to see folks in Barbados coming up in June. Everyone's welcome to come down. Fred, I know you're going to be there, so it'll be good to see you again there down at the Caribbean Regional Congress. So, Dung, that's all I got. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Eric. That's very interesting. And the team is planning to have a launch for this e-course in sometime in June with our clients. So the main targets of the audience would be our SID clients, and
Zong, you're muted. Zong, we can't hear you, Zong. Are you muted?
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much, Eric. I just would like to tell the participant that the team is planning to have the launch for the e-course in sometime in June and the main audience would be our clients. So yeah, we'll prepare for that. And we have received the funding from GFDR. Thank you so much. And with that, I would like to invite Niens, practice manager of GFDR, to have a closing remarks for our seminar. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for sharing all of this. Turn on my camera so Fred wouldn't get a shock of thinking I might have fallen asleep. It's getting a little bit late on this end. It was super interesting to follow I can't say that I have the capacity to pick up all of it, but I think I picked up a few things. Well, first of all, of course, we're talking about small island development states, and that means small economies, lack of people, as we heard, little scale and limited possibilities for infrastructure redundancy. That these are some of the key challenges, development challenges, really, for that size countries. Disaster risk is a key piece of most small island states' development challenges, and you combine the two, and we've heard a lot of good examples about how creative and highly professional teams across our various practices have been addressing this, learned a lot, documented it, developed tools that can at least somewhat easier be passed on to other development professionals who, when they engage in small island states on transport, will no doubt come across the same challenges again. So I think in that sense, it's rather remarkable actually what you have all been able to produce over the last several years, what we continue to build on. I'm glad that the unit that I now manage, the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, also known as GFDRR, with a lot of support from, in particular, the government of Japan, that we have been able to contribute to some of this knowledge generation, some of your innovation, some of your trial and error. I do think it shows our institutional capacity as a World Bank Group to operate beyond the sector, to integrate new thinking. I know there's other development partners. It's very important that we work with those partners, in particular in small island states, because of the lack of people problem. But I'm not sure there's that many other development partners that can offer the same combination of breadth and depth that we can offer. And I do think it's important we bring it to bear in this kind of maybe relatively complex challenges. So a few other things that I think I picked up, not surprisingly, long-term engagement and strong commitments in terms of building capacity along the way is absolutely critical to have a shot at moving the needle on something. We heard and saw about modern tools, if you will, innovation from a simplification point of view, but integrating lots of information, improving decision making through easier and better access to much more information, which is a foundation, I think, increasingly, not only in SIDS, but certainly also in SIDS. But also, as we heard in one of the comments from Bowen following up, probably also as a foundation to show that there are systems in place, why it matters what we're doing, and which will be key to keep concessional financing coming to the islands. Maybe one, I picked up a few other things, but I think by now anyone who's at least sitting on the DC side of things, I don't think we have capacity to pick up anything else. So I think I'll stop with that. But just say that I hope that we can continue to collaborate with the transport sector very closely. My unit is specializing in disaster and climate risk management. We work on these topics from a number of different angles, including the work that Fred is leading, that focuses on infrastructure and therefore is an obvious and key counterpart to you all from the transport practice, but a number of other angles as well, including on nature-based solutions, including on risk analytics more generally. So I think we have quite some skills to offer in that space. And when you all from the transport side come across a need or an interest to try to dig a bit deeper into that, I hope you think of us as someone you potentially could partner with. We of course also will continue to allocate grant resources, and we hope that some of your teams are interested in working on risk issues and therefore will come and ask for our money to help you do just that. So with that, I'll shut up and very soon go to bed. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Niels. And it's very encouraging remarks, for us to continue collaboration and, working together, both DIM and transport, toward the resilience of transport sector in our SID clients. And thank you so much, Niels. Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, especially colleagues from DC. It's very late, and you are still awake. And of course, thank you so much, our team, Karen, Maria, Bowen, Fred, and Zhang, for working together, going together for the long journey. For these ASAs, and I do hope that with our outcomes or reason from this ASA, we would be having some kind of useful information and support for our clients. And thank you so much, and we'll have the launch for the ECOS with our clients later. But thank you so much, and have a good night there, our DC colleague, and have a good day, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you all.